Hey, Ghost Machine fans, this one's for you. Welcome to the Ghost Machine Fans Podcast, episode 43. The deep freeze is in nationwide on this beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd, and we're excited to dive back into the world of the Unnamed with a deep dive into Geiger number 8. Today is also the release date for Hyde Street number 3. No! I am Nick, and this time I'm joined by my guest co-host, Rob, from Comic Book Chronicles, who is making his triumphant return to the show. How are you this evening, sir?
Nick, the pod will not cast itself. The pod will not cast itself, my friend. Therefore, it falls to us to cast the pod on this January day that is colder than a mother-in-law's kiss. And I'm delighted to be here with you, sir.
So remind everybody who you are. You're not always on the show. We're glad to have you back. And then let everybody know what you do real quick and where the best place is to find you now and if there's any updates, in the near future related to that.
Okay. Yeah, I review comic books in short form videos online. My videos are primarily distributed on and produced for TikTok. Now, by the time your listeners are listening to this, TikTok may or may not be a thing anymore. We don't know. Supposedly the app is going to be banned on January 19th. But the good news is you can also find me on Instagram and Threads at Comic Book Chronicles Rob. I'm also on YouTube at the same name. Lemon8 is like the successor app to TikTok. I'm at Comic Book Chronicles on there. And then Blue Sky, the new Twitter, at comicbookrob.bsky.social. I'm still getting used to that one, but have a lot of fun doing it. Having a lot of fun meeting folks like you, sir.
And likewise, man. So what's it like for you doing a 60-minute deep dive into a comic book instead of a 2-minute bit?
Well, I am intravenously hooked up to a coffee IV drip at this point because it's an exponentially longer medium, man. I'm just one guy over here. I don't know how you do it.
I know, and we should mention we are very, very bummed that Snog L could not join us this evening. She's indisposed, but she's going to be right back at it for Geiger number 9, which is going to be 2 episodes from now, because I have some very special news to share with you in a little bit. It's a surprise. I haven't told you yet, Robert.
Oh my. Okay, hang on.
Yeah, we're not there yet, though. First, we have to talk about this shout-out.
All right.
I wanted to ask, have you ever heard of a YouTube show called The Experience?
No, I've had plenty of experiences on YouTube, but you wouldn't want to hear about them. Talk to me about The Experience. What is it?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's these 2 gents, and every week they go over FOC dates, issues. And so they literally share their screen on the Lunar website, lunardistribution.com, where you can scroll down, look at release dates or FOC dates, and they always go through the FOC comics and talk about the different ones, and they stop on different ones to highlight them and say why they recommend different ones. It's really cool. And so, yeah.
Now, FOC, can you remind me and everybody what FOC stands for?
It stands for Final Order Cutoff. And this is something we've had listeners mail in about, that we've had little segments about too, because it's always kind of confusing for everybody, but it's really relevant to the comic book world right now to sustain it, really. And what that means is that typically every Monday, although most comic book shops want you to do it by Sunday, mine in particular is a good example, and there are understandable reasons why. But they want you to put your orders in for things that are going to come out way later, as opposed to a release date, which is the date that it's going to be on the shelf. But it's become much more commonplace for shops to gauge how many orders they're going to make for the shelf based on the general pre-order interest.
Yeah.
And so the FOC date is really relevant. It helps also determine, when additional printings may occur and variables like that. But the most important part is it's how you get your comics, especially if you're like a collector who wants to make sure they get the first printing of something, or if you're
Hmm.
like wanting those ratio variants, that's the way to like guarantee you get them. If especially if there's not going to be very many, that's what that means. And these folks on the Experience, they literally pull up the Lunar Distribution website, which is the best place to check these dates and items, and they run through each one. And we wanted to give them a shout out because they did a recording on January 17th for the upcoming OC date, and they got to the Geiger part, and they said, you know, the Geiger fans are amazing, and they basically went on and on about how Geiger and Ghost Machine fans are a community that's very positive and very invested. And they gave the example of like how they'll see on social media like lengthy discussions about the characters like fully organically removed from the schematic of the comic, I guess you could say. And
Hmm.
that like the characters, like the community is so in love with the property that the characters have come alive within the community, and it's like its own thing. And that was essentially them saying, like, as a compliment to the Ghost Machine fan community, we're Ghost Machine fans, quote unquote, that's our Instagram, but they were saying too about the community of Ghost Machine fans, all of us, all of
Community at
you,
large.
yes, everywhere, that it's just this community that is just in love with the property so much that it's infectious. And so I would definitely just say thank you. Not that they were talking about us, but just like about us fans in general, that's really cool to say that on your show. And I recommend checking out their show because it does give you a sense of like, oh, that's how I can go pre-order my comics, and that's how I can decide. It's a neat idea. I think it's a cool show.
The Experience on YouTube.
And we'll put like links and stuff in
Yeah.
the episode. We'll do that. That's a good idea. So Snoggle's not here, but this means that I still have to skedaddle because Robert's in the newsroom.
That's right. That's me. Here I am. I'm sitting at the Ghost Machine fans news desk. There's a lot of crumbled chip crumbs and other things I'm probably not allowed to mention over the air, but here we go. The epic first appearance of Ash Arden on the last page of Geiger number 10 has caused the book to go into a second print already. It appears to be the first second print Ghost Machine book that won't have the usual yellow and black cover. Also, the upcoming final order cutoff date for January 27th will include the Red Coat Volume 1 trade paperback. Now, there's two versions of that. There's a direct market exclusive and a regular one. Nick, back to you.
I do have one little piece of surprise news that I'm profoundly excited about.
And let me take a sip of coffee here. I'm gonna strap in.
So I just heard today that when we record our episode that's going to air on January 29th, we will be able to have our next creator interview with Mr. Peter Tomasi, who I'm very excited to meet because
That is a big
he's
one.
awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And of course, he's the author of the Rockefellers for Ghost Machine, and
Yep.
he does Hornsby and Halo as well.
Yes, that's correct. And we really are enjoying those books. Especially Hornsby and Halo, it has some nuance that I don't know if everybody's catching, and it's just awesome. And the Rockefellers is turning into something new, especially with some of the art that Francis has been teasing about. That you and I talked about, because
Right,
I think
you
it
and
is
I-
an I.
Well,
That'll be
that's
really
amazing,
exciting.
my friend. I'm very happy. I've met Peter Tomasi. Well, I mean, I shook it. I mean, we're not drinking buddies, but I met him at a couple of different conventions, and I got him to sign not only some issues, but I think a script for, I think it was a Batman and Robin annual that he did with Patrick Gleason. Like I'm not a Peter Tomasi expert, but I am a big fan of the stuff that I have read of his.
I really liked his Green Lantern Corps run.
Yes,
And
yes,
and some of his Batman and Robin stuff was pretty decent too. But that's what I really like about the Rockefellers and Hornsby and Halo is that you can tell it's like a totally unvarnished, like that's just his voice with the other, obviously the other creators that he's partnered with in both cases. So really cool, really cool. Very excited about that. But we're not talking about that Ghost Machine universe today. That's the Family Honesties. We need to go back to something a little darker. And we need to go to the world of the Unnamed, right? We need some post-apocalyptia in our night. you know? And we're a little bit behind.
The great world to be behind in, my friend.
Yeah. So we know that Geiger 10 just recently came out. And that was really what Rob was talking about in the news, too, that the second printing of that was just announced. But this is a book that we're going to try to catch up on in the next several episodes. But in this book, we need to, before we talk about the book and the creators, and we're going to spoil it all, we need to tell you about the 3 covers so that if you haven't bought it, but somehow you've arrived here, you know if you can go to your local comic book shop, you have what your options are. Have you had a chance to glance at these 3 fantastic covers, Rob?
I have indeed.
How'd you feel about that schoolroom one? I like that schoolroom.
Well, it's the main cover, the A cover by Gary Frank and Brad Anderson, the one you're referring to?
Yes!
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that we don't see an actual classroom in the issue, am I right?
I don't believe we do. And that's interesting because when we got the end of the last issue, Ghost Machine fans, and they met the kids refer to, I know that like there being a principal and maybe there being a school. So it like alluded to it.
Yeah.
And then, but then like Gary wasn't going to be the artist. So maybe it was like Gary's interpretation of it.
Sometimes I get on covers for depicting things that aren't in the issue. But in this case, the classroom is, as Taserface would say, metaphorical. As we obviously deal with things in this issue that deal with school knowledge, that kind of thing. So I think that the classroom setting works, even though we do not have a literal classroom setting.
Yeah, it made me think that like maybe it was in the script and they didn't use the scene or it's like relatively figurative or whatever, but it's neat because you get a little bit of Gary Frank, even though he's not doing this issue, because this is a run that somebody else is doing, and we'll talk about that in our creator roll call. But for now, this is the usual quote unquote Geiger crew, like you said, Gary Frank, Brad Anderson, are who did the pencils, inks, and the colors. So
and a gorgeous cover it is, by the way.
It is. So there's a B cover by somebody that I'm not really familiar with, but it is a pretty metal cover. It's pretty sweet. Like I feel like I could hear some like guitar riffs in the background while he's doing whatever he's doing. But are you familiar with Mr. Derek Chu?
Not that I'm immediately aware of, but based on the work that he has turned in here, I would like to be familiar with him. The pose that he's got, Geiger striking, very dynamic. I like the flowing of the cape in the background. It sort of envelops the frame. I like the texture that, oddly enough, he made Geiger's clothes and the way we can see the skeleton down under the muscle tissue. It's just got a great look and feel to it. I don't know if I've ever seen the Geiger character drawn with that kind of texture before.
It makes him look kind of translucent.
Yes, exactly.
That is really cool. Way to go, Derek Chu. There is one other cover. So, by the way, none of these are ratio covers. It's just A, B, and C. You can get whichever one you want. Now, this last one is by Leonardo Colapietro, as I believe how it's pronounced. I have seen a handful of this person's covers before. This one is really neat. It's got like Geiger's breastplate kind of as the background horizon. And then you've got the Statue of Liberty, and then you've got like radioactive energy hitting what looks like Geiger who's floating. Like it's very abstract. It's abstract, right?
Yes.
And so I don't know necessarily what it means, especially the Statue of Liberty being there. I guess in this issue, they're talking about like the perception of freedom and information and learning, maybe. But it's super cool looking.
Absolutely. And, I had not made the connection that was Geiger's armor, his breastplate there. I didn't know what that was. So I'm glad that you said that, because I'm like, what is going on there? I didn't know if it was just a design or something, but with the Statue of Liberty, I mean, you can read into that if you want to, because we're not in New York in this issue. Am I right?
No, I don't believe we're anywhere near New York.
No, so it's one of those things where you can say, all right, well, is it about the liberty and freedom to obtain and absorb information at your own discretion? Is the Statue of Liberty there for that purpose, or is it just kind of there because it looks cool? I think you could probably go either way.
Very interesting stuff. I believe I've seen him do like a Ninjak cover, if I recall correctly, a Valiant character. But those are the covers that we have for you. So we have to take a very important pause right now. Do you remember why we have to take this pause, Rob?
This is the spoiler pause, is it not?
It is, because we're going to go through everything in this book. We're going to talk about it. And so if you haven't read it, this is not the scenario where you want to say, I'll just listen to them talk about it. Like, you should read it and then talk about it with us and listen, and do it that way. So we will make this the official spoiler pause for Geiger, number 8, with a little bit of radioactive. All right, so we're ready. Can you give us a creator roll call on this guy?
All right, our author for this issue is our old friend Jeff Johns. Our fill-in artist for this issue is Paul Pelletier. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Andrew Hennessy as our inker. John Calise is our colorist, and then our letterer is our good old friend Rob Lee.
Rob Lee. That's an interesting, right? We only see Andrew Curry ink on Redcoat. We see Danny Mickey ink on anything Yvonne does. So, welcome to the party, Andrew Hennessy. Heck yeah.
There you are. Welcome, sir.
We're going to deep dive into this book, and we don't really need to do a where did we leave off until I feel like we get past the little intro, and then we can reflect on where we let off. I'm gonna tell the listeners how this ran down, but I would love for you to tell me your impression of this first scene, which is it's all these different. So I'm gonna kind of like speak to it as if I don't know who they are. I'm just gonna describe them for a moment, okay?
Yep.
It's all these different characters that are really interesting and varied, right? Like, you've got a woman that she's got one of those long cigarette extender things, and she looks like she's in like the 1920s, and she's a gangster. And then you got like a pirate, and then you got a creepy guy who looks like he wants to like cut somebody's brain out. You got a Roman guy that looks like he wants to look like the evil Nero emperor. You got a guy that looks like he wants to be in a safari, and you got a lady that has a crown on. That's an interesting cast of characters. When you read this, what did you know, and what did you think?
Well, at first I thought I picked up the wrong issue. These people are very visually different. But yeah, no, unlike you and Snoggle, I jumped on to the Ghost Machine universe or multiverse with Ghost Machine #1, which I believe came out last March. So I have no knowledge. Well, I have a vague knowledge, but a very vague knowledge of, the previous Geiger book, the Junkyard Joe book, the previous Redcoat book. My Ghost Machine knowledge begins with Ghost Machine #1. Once you realize that, okay, you are in fact in a Geiger book, you can kind of come to a general understanding, okay, these people look important. These people look like they are, at least some of them are wealthy. So you can kind of grasp that, okay, this is some kind of, I don't want to say government necessarily, but some kind of assembly of people in power, like a council of people in power. And that was the impression that I came away with. I wasn't exactly sure what I was seeing, but I had a pretty good idea generally, if that makes sense.
It's interesting, right? It's like, why are these people together? That's kind of cool. It's a post-apocalyptic environment too. There's also an empty seat, and you're like, what's that? What's that all about, And so the reason I positioned it that way is you had told me that you had started a Ghost Machine #1, like many, many, many people have. And so you were like, I want you to read the others because they're really good, but not because like you necessarily have to. And then you offered to do so. And then I realized, wait, let's not do that, because your impressions as somebody who's read from Ghost Machine #1 is it's interesting, right? Because these characters are all from the original Geiger series, and especially the Geiger 80-page Giant. which is
Okay.
also the first appearance of Simon Pure and Nate the Nuclear Knight. And so it took place in Las Vegas, and they were referred to as the Warlords of Las Vegas, and they each have a casino when but it's all connected in a way that like the air is purified so that they're outside of the radioactivity. And so it's a whole world that was built in like the 6 issues of Geiger plus the 80-page giant. And it involves these characters, and they've only been kind of hinted at here and there. And the reason that they've been hinted at here and there is usually in conjunction with when we see President Griffin. Do you recall that character that looks kind of like the Invisible Man?
I do.
They actually mention him when they're saying like that the one person who's not there, her name, I know she's a she because there's a story about her in Geiger 80-page giant, although I do not believe she is ever pictured with any of these people. She's always on her own in this story, which is also a very short story. But Safari Bob, who's sitting at the head of the table, he says that she essentially has given her alliances with President Griffin. And it looks like this group of people, who are now being referred to as the 7 Revenants, as opposed to the Warlords of Las Vegas, which is what it was before, when it was, I think, a few others too, that they are in opposition to President Griffin. So we're seeing factions develop within the world of the Unnamed that are in opposition of each other outside of Geiger.
All I can say is, of course, they're from Vegas. Why wouldn't they be from Vegas? Even in a post-apocalyptic world, Vegas is crazy. No, I mean, what's cool about this and all these different, I guess, realms, if you want to call them that, is it invites curiosity about the extended world of Geiger and what these different places that these people are in charge of are like.
Yeah, the Geiger 80-page giant is a collection of short stories about each one that tells you their like very brief origins, and it made many people want more. And so like this is the first little like bit. That's why it's kind of exciting, but it's also kind of fun that I can tell you, hey, go read this, and it's gonna strengthen the experience you're already having, essentially.
So you know what? Next time I'm on the show, you ask me, and I will report back as far as the original Geiger books.
That's all we do get about that, though, right? Because the rest of the book is on the track that you are familiar with. That's been going on since this series of Geiger began, right? Since issue number 1, and that's them coming through this tunnel. So they were just out in the wasteland, and they came upon the kids in the wasteland, and then we got to see night crawlers, which we hadn't seen, which is another thing
the big
we hadn't
bugs.
seen. Yeah, the big bugs, and it was cool to see Paul Pelletier draw them. Even though I love Gary, it was one of those things where you see something that's like part of the universe. Like there's even a bio page for the Nightcrawlers in one of the issues. So when you see a different artist write something that you associate with something you love already, that's like usually directly associated with Gary, it was kind of cool because it makes it come alive more. Like you're like, woo, more Nightcrawlers, yay! Like we're fans.
I think I said in one of the reviews I did of one of these issues that Paul Pelletier has worked on, if they want to make him the artist that tags in for Gary Frank when he needs a break, I'm all for that. I mean, I think he did a great enough job with these issues that he worked on that I'm game to see more from him on this book.
Absolutely. And he does a lot of other work as well. You should check him out online.
Absolutely.
And on his Instagram. He's been very supportive on the Instagram as well. So they are with these kids because they saved them from the night crawlers. And they're like, where are you guys from? Like, what are you doing out here? Because the kids have the suits. They have the hazmat suits to make sure that they can get around. And so the kids are like, well, we're not supposed to be out here, but we live somewhere else and we got to go through this tunnel. And I really thought it was neat how like they're going through the tunnel. He's got his boron rods out just to be like a light source. But I guess it's okay because, they got their suits on and all that. But they're talking about taking them off as they like come out of the tunnel and it starts to look like bright and shiny and nice. And Barney is smart enough to stop them from taking the gear off until Tariq puts his rods away so they don't get hurt. Like, that's pretty sharp,
It's a nice way to remind readers, myself included, that this man is literally radioactive and being near him can hurt you. That's something that we will come back and I think touch on in issue 9, which I think you and Snoggle are going to talk about in the near future.
It turns into, like, legitimately, they pop out of this tunnel and there's a, like, untouched town from pre-war, essentially, or whatever, right? Is this what you were expecting?
I didn't really know what I was expecting, to be honest, because there were any number of things that could have been there. I will say that if the idea is to give us a sense of pre-war back to the good old days, I think that they accomplished that goal really well, especially in terms of the colors. Lots of like rich yellowish green. The color on the buildings pops really well. There's a sense of warmth about this image that you don't have out in the apocalyptic wasteland for obvious reasons, and that's the perfect sentiment that you want to get across to the reader in this moment.
I wasn't expecting this picturesque. I was expecting when I saw, because at the end of Geiger 7, they had the preview page that was that Gary Frank schoolroom one, and I was envisioning more like a vault or something like in Fallout, or more like a military installation that like controlled the messaging of a new society. I didn't expect Grover's Corners.
There you go.
Like this is something else, right? And it is really cool. Is those colors are like softening and they're comforting and they're like, hey, this is legitimately not a radioactive wasteland for a moment. I guess there is to some extent, an explanation that has to do with because it's in a valley and the wind, it was unaffected. And like, so this is a part of the earth that's unaffected. And they learn that because they meet, I guess, the closest thing to an antagonist, right? That this particular issue has. And who do you know who I'm talking about?
William Webb is who you're talking about. Principal William Webb?
Yeah, the guy that he says that he oversees the community. So like Nate's getting all excited, like, oh my gosh, we don't have to leave. They have a park and clean air and blah blah blah. Can't we just stay? And Geiger's like, no, bad things happen to people when we're around. And so then Principal Webb is, trying to determine what's going on with these kids, because apparently they're not usually allowed to go out there.
I was going to say he's naturally suspicious of new people because, like you said, the kids aren't allowed to go out, and I would assume they're naturally not allowed to bring people back in without permission. And of course, these people have weapons, and they've got a 2-headed dog and a zebra with 3 eyes. So I would, if you're going to be suspicious of people, I would think it's natural to be suspicious of these people.
And this whole time, I expected a greater sense of dread around this Principal Webb person, because he's mentioned, I believe, on like one of the last panels of the last issue. They might not call him Webb, but they might say, I think they say something about the principal or whatever, and that they're not supposed to, that they can't bring books back and that kind of stuff. And so I'm not expecting this fella that's dressed like a fireman, and it doesn't seem like he's doing anything malicious. He's just really adamant that if you go into the nuclear wasteland, you will die. So he wants to do anything he can to make sure that no one does that, especially the kids, right? Like, absolutely. Is that unreasonable?
Well, granted, I've never been in a nuclear wasteland myself, but I mean, I would assume it's pretty reasonable. No, I mean, I don't think he comes off overly threatening. I think he comes off cautious, and there's nothing wrong with that under the circumstances. So as a reader, maybe you feel a little bit wary of him, but I don't think you feel threatened by him initially.
You don't, and it's a conundrum to me because they all get into this literally like a lunchroom setup that they have going on in this post-apocalyptia. and
Mm-hmm.
looks like a fully functional diner or whatever for the town, and they're
Mm-hmm.
having a discussion. Nate's pretty much just really happy about the food. Principal Webb is explaining why they're there, why they survive, and his viewpoint on visitors. And he goes so far as to be like, you guys are good people. Can you at least come talk to the school and tell them the truth? He's like, he's not trying to manipulate anything. He's just like, tell them how dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really not, I'm not saying that he's infallible to the end, but at this time, before we used to like peel back another layer that changes some things later that involves fire, um,
Mm-hmm.
he seems, it's hard for me not to understand where he's coming from to a certain extent, because there's only one way in and out of this place. He says that like the one bridge went like that was destroyed, so the only way in and out is that tunnel. So they have like a very unique situation, and nobody seems to know that they're there, so they're safe.
Have you read The Walking Dead? Are you familiar with The Walking Dead?
I'm familiar with it. I read the first omnibus. I think I
Okay,
got it at
okay, because
Ollie's.
that was well. There you shout out to Ollie's. No, what that's what these initial Grover's Corners scenes reminded me of. At various different points in both the Walking Dead comic book and the corresponding TV show, you have stories where the survivors come across towns or communities that have various different amenities that previous civilized society had. They have running water. I think a couple of them even have electricity. Scenarios that are very much like what we see here. So that's what this made me think of. And the thing about those Walking Dead stories is that there's usually a moment where the other shoe drops, and you find out that the leader of the community or whatever that initially comes off very nice usually is not so nice, and that there's something afoul here. William Webb did not come off threatening to me initially. He seemed very reasonable, if not very guarded. But I with these scenes as I was moving through them, I was very much waiting for the other shoe to drop. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're like waiting for like a corpse to fall out of a closet or something, like
Yeah, it's
or
like
like
what's hidden here that we
or
don't know about.
like the meatloaf is poisoned or
Oh
turns you
yeah,
into something. Like there's got to be a
meatloaf is
catch.
people.
The meatloaf, yeah, there you go. That's what it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do think is cool is they really lean into the way that you get your page turn, because he cycles back to saying to Tariq at the table, "Help me protect my children. As a
Mm.
father, it's all you live for." And he doesn't
Yes.
know anything about Tariq and Tariq's life.
Mm-hmm.
And the following two pages are like essentially a dream, but
Mm-hmm.
the one word that I could think of in these next two pages was cinematic.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we go into a very I think it's his birthday. The scene changes and we get this book that he has been given erupt into green flames, and then he turns essentially into the skeletal figure that we've come to recognize him as. A very fitting scene and a very fitting glimpse back into Tariq's past. Now, we talked about the original Geiger books. Now, we see that he has very short hair in these early in on the first page of the flashback scene. That's because he's sick, correct? Or do we know that?
Yeah, this scene is because he's undergoing chemo treatments.
There you go. Okay, just making sure. Yeah.
Experimental.
Mm,
Yeah. By the way, superhero. Ding ding ding. Well,
there
not
you
a
go. Exactly.
superhero.
Experiments
Anti-hero.
always go well.
Different. Not a superhero comic. But
Mm,
yes, he was undergoing experimental chemo treatments. The book he gets is blank. That's the thing, which is weird, and that's when he like turns into the radioactive man in the dream. And like I felt like, man, one day I would love to see that on a screen. I don't usually feel that way about comics. Like comics are my favorite medium, but in this
yes.
moment I was like, man, that's a good moment to be in a show or a movie. I just think it's
Certain
cool.
moments just translate naturally
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. And then sometimes it's the opposite, where it's like, wow, only a comic could do that. And sometimes,
Exactly.
only a movie can do certain things. In this case, we get 2 pages of primarily visual storytelling, right? There's very little dialogue. There's a little bit when he wakes up from the dream.
Hmm.
And I like Paul's art a lot in these. Like, that's really cool how he catches the moments, where he's getting up and he's looking over. Like, you can like understand exactly what's going on. It directs your eye and your thought process rather well.
Hmm.
And because he just is like really subtle in the window, there's like something like a glow, right? Like, or like
Hmm.
smoke, but we're not like super sure yet. Like, what did you think when you saw that? Did you think fire?
I thought that's probably not good. I mean, I
Right.
think I don't recall if my mind immediately went to fire, but generally, if something is glowing in a post-apocalyptic world, it's not something good in my experience.
But this is like an orangey deal. And then
Hmm.
like he goes down and investigate, and then that's also the light that's hitting what looks to be the kids and Principal Webb.
Yes.
And it looks like it's fire, and he's like pulling a book out of a bag, and we're not sure, but like
Hmm.
they're trying to tell him not to do something. And then it's a rough thing that he is doing, right? Like, think about this: no computers in this world, no internet, and he is doing
Hmm.
what?
He's burning books, Nick. The man is burning
I
books.
know. Oh, and it's like that is such a like that moment, the way they drew it, we're just showing him throwing them in there. It's like, oh, it's such a painful moment to see that.
Not just as someone who loves books as I do, but as someone who is married to a librarian. I was trained as a journalist and all that stuff. The burning
Okay.
of books is a very loaded topic to yours truly.
Well, I think, it's one of those things that typically makes a person or organization rather reprehensible in the eyes
Hmm.
of an audience.
Yes.
And it's also in particular important to Tariq because he loves books, right? Like, he's always wanting books,
Hmm.
like how important it is to him. And it's also important to him that they're able to read those. And
Hmm.
so in it's kind of like it's this challenging thing because Principal Webb is like the whole point of this is that we just don't want them to go into danger,
Hmm.
right? But then it
Yeah.
also looks like he doesn't actually do it as much. Like, he says, "Don't worry about them. We love our children. Their punishment, it will only be extra charge." Basically saying, like, I guess he's not going to burn any more books, or and he's not going to hurt
Right.
them. But which, like, I don't think there
Mhm.
was anybody who was worried about anybody getting hurt. But he does say they went scavenging for books and they don't allow them in the
Right.
town, and then it gets kind of dark, like,
Right. Well, I
dramatic.
mean, you and Snuggle are parents, and I mean, I'm a parent as well. I mean,
Hmm.
as a parent, can you see things from his perspective? Can you, I don't say sympathize, but can you understand why he's doing what he's doing?
I guess, but I probably would go about managing it in a different way if I
Yeah.
was in his shoes. I would probably
Yeah.
like give them all the books and get more
Hmm.
books. And I would be like,
Yeah.
read these and don't go out there, but
Hmm.
read these, and
Hmm.
like, if you get, when you get older, if you can read one of these and figure out a way where we can go out there and be safe, fine. But if not, you got to stay here in this wonderful place. But I don't think what he's doing, no matter what, it just leads them to want to do the opposite of what he wants more.
Hmm.
But we get some insight, right, from Jeff and Paul about why he's like this, because we get this like flashback.
And we get some good information about his life as a firefighter and fought against. Are these mutants we're fighting against? That he's fighting against?
Yeah, these are basically like people that were left over. I think they might be organ people. They're probably the organ
Yes.
people. We haven't seen them in a little bit, since that one sweet one with like that big pile of them on the cover. That was pretty cool. And earlier
There
in
you
the
go.
series, yeah, and he's basically saying that he knows what radiation does to people, and he's
Hmm.
experienced it, and so that's just to him kind of taking him down this path of I don't care. I have to do whatever registers in my mind as preventing them from going out there.
Usually, when you see books being burned, either in reality or in a fictional setting, it's by an oppressive government or group of some kind trying to prevent the public from, rising up, rebelling, equipping them with knowledge that would be bad from the oppressive group's perspective. Here, it's on a much smaller scale, and he's essentially doing the same thing, but he's doing it from his perspective, at least, out of love and affection for these kids in his community. So that's where the interesting kind of twist is. I agree with you. I wouldn't burn the books either if I were in his position, but, from an intellectual perspective, given what this man has seen and been through, you can understand how his mind would go there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they do a good job of like showing us why. It's
Mm-hmm.
what makes a lot of villains have a little bit of depth. And I mean he is rather kind of like one-sided in his conclusion because he listens to the whole thing and Tariq is still like, yeah, okay, fine, but
Mm-hmm.
none of that means you need to burn books. And the dude is like, no, it does because ideas are dangerous and blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, what if you just burned all the books that tell you how to make a tourniquet, man?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if you
Yeah.
just burned all the books that tell you how to make penicillin? Like, like,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's think this one through just a little bit. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess that's an extreme example because obviously there's functional societies in parts of the world of the unnamed, even though it's after the unknown war. But ultimately, to Tariq, it's not his business, right? Because they're not his kids, and he's just ready to
Mm-hmm.
bounce. And so he's gonna go
Yep.
wake up his three-eyed zebra and his friend.
The quote that I thought in this scene right before Tariq walks off, the old ways need to be forgotten. They need to be erased so that no one ever tries to rebuild what destroyed us. And Webb says, ideas are dangerous. And then Geiger says, so is ignorance. I think
Mm-hmm.
those last two sentences, I think, are very concise, very powerful, and they really cut to the core of the conflict.
Well, because it's really more about like the overarching concept of that and
Yes.
and and what it represents,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's in like a microcosm of a society. And they must have like some really great horticulture or farming going on in there. You know what I mean? Like they had a good looking lunchroom.
Yeah, yeah, they got a good look at a lot of things. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of time with Grover's Corners and these people. We've got about 3 issues,
Mm-hmm.
less than that. And one of the things about the book burning is that Jeff Johns and Paul Pelletier and this whole team, they get a lot of storytelling mileage out of the book burning fairly quickly, because when you see someone burning books, you get the idea of what they're doing pretty quickly. So we didn't need to dive too deeply into the this community. We didn't need to go too far into the background. I mean, he did a good job explaining it and putting his own twist on it, Jeff Johns did, but I think he got a lot of mileage relatively quickly out of the book burning.
Because it helps you ally against that character for all intents and
Mm-hmm.
purposes, which means that when the three children decide to attempt to follow Tariq, Nate, Barney, and
Mm-hmm.
Zigzag, you kind of empathize, right? Like you're like, okay, I get it. Like that is pretty bad, but like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
you're not gonna be safe. Like, could you wait until you're bigger or older? Like, so,
Mm-hmm.
like learn some more skills. Like, there's all these things, but obviously, like his demeanor and his way of going about it is not going to generate that type of response. So they want to go
No,
with
yeah.
them. And I love this twist ending. I was not expecting that to happen here at the end, man.
It's a great little moment when the kids say, I want to come with you, because I think it firmly casts William Webb as the villain, if it to whatever extent that he wasn't firmly cast there before. But no, we've got a big reveal on our final page. So, okay, So tell me who this is, Nick. He says nowhere is safe from the king. Who are we looking at here?
So there is a character in Geiger 1 through 6 that is called the King of Camelot. And that is a different character than this character.
Yes.
And this is that character's successor, which is all I want to say for now, because it would spoil either the next issue that we haven't, or just if you haven't read the old stuff. So, yes, it looks like he is the king, and he's got that like font that Rob Lee chose.
He's got the regal font.
Yeah, and it matches the font that the queen had at the table, right? And so there's a thing there, and then he's got people running with him that at first on the right and the left they look like they're wearing gear like Nate. Did you see that?
Yes. Yeah. We've got two medieval knight looking guys flanking him to the right and the left, but then behind them we've got what appears to be a gentleman in a gas mask and a suit of some kind, and then to the far right we have somebody almost in a safari outfit with a gas mask of his own, and then we've got lots of gas masks and hazmat suits hats for some reason.
There is a market for people that design cool radioactive hazmat suits in the world of the Unnamed, because there's all these different suits you see. Sometimes you just see people with just a mask on, like Simon, when he just has a mask on. Yeah, it looks like Safari Bob there in the corner, and then a gangster type of guy, and there's all this kind of stuff. So it's reminiscent of that table in the beginning, right?
Yeah, we've got this unique potpourri of looks.
And then you have your typical preview of the next issue, which implies that there's going to be actually a conflict between Tariq and Nate.
That is something that they follow up on next issue. I'm anxious to hear what you and Snoggle have to say about that one, but the preview page for the next issue definitely teases a confrontation of some kind, or some sort of collision between Nate and Tariq, which cuts to the core of the series, in my opinion, because, at the end of the day, to me, Geiger is a buddy book about Tariq and Nate. So to see them potentially at odds creates a lot of drama, more than it normally would.
And the cover has like a dialogue bubble that's like, "No, I'm your friend." So it implies that Geiger is confused for some reason.
Right.
And then we do have one of these really cool bio pages. Do you have any like trading cards from the 90s that on the front it's like a cool art, and on the back it's like their dossier file? Do you have any of that?
I don't have any on me, but I'm definitely familiar with the look. I mean, it's a great. This kind of thing is really handy, especially for somebody, sometimes not only do I need refreshers about what's going on with the universe, but somebody who didn't read the previous Ghost Machine stuff. This is a great way to catch you up on who these people are, what the status quo is. And there's a character that, I won't spoil it, but there's a character that returns in issue 10 that this dossier type page was very helpful in catching me up on.
Yeah, for sure. Good point. And actually, in reading this, it does mention that he took over when the queen's son died. So the queen's son was king. He died, and then this guy took over. But it doesn't, he just happened to come in, and he's like a super tough military guy, and he got this, and he married her, and he's going to get it done. And he's going after the glowing man. So that's pretty neat. It was wonderful to have you back on the show. If you want to check out any of our cool content, you can go to www.ghostmachinefans.com, where you can get to our wiki, which has a whole bunch of new stuff being added to it by the wonderful Cameron Gill out in the UK. He's been adding bio pages, graphics. He and I are adding a whole bunch of issue pages as well with cover galleries so that we can get it up to date. And we would love more contributors. It's a super easy thing to get into if you enjoy helping build a fan database. You can also find our Pinterest on there. I think we have the Facebook and the Reddit. If the Reddit's not on there, make sure to check that out. They're really going strong lately. as well. But most of what we do on a daily basis, where you can find all of our fun reels as well as little clips from our creator interviews, is on Instagram at Ghost Machine Fans. If you want to send us a listener mail or a heckle or whatever, you can do it by emailing ghostmachinefans@gmail.com. To all of you out there in cyberspace, thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight on the Ghost Machine Fans Podcast.